Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. I assume shortly after start of business today, some federal court in some part of the country will be enjoining Trump's latest travel restrictions announced yesterday. A travel ban 2.0 on 12 countries and restrictions on another half dozen because, well, Trump outlined it. There's a number of variables, but they all relate to our national security, and the substantiation for the action that he has taken is a daily occurrence with stories like the one yesterday about ICE arresting in Philadelphia a man from Tajikistan affiliated with al-Qaeda who was paroled by ICE under President Biden. Every single day we have these stories. Every single day we have stories like a federal judge enjoining the Trump administration from moving to deport the family of the man who committed, allegedly, but he did, committed that terrorist attack in Boulder, Colorado, even though they're in this country illegally. So despite the precedent, the Supreme Court's decision in Trump v. Hawaii in Trump's first term, which upheld his travel ban 1.0, if you will, I'm sure we'll see more litigation because there are all sorts of forums where Democrats may shop to find a politician in a robe. What to do about it, or more to the point, what will the Supreme Court do about it and when? For more on this, please be joined by Will Chamberlain, Senior Counsel at the Article 3 Project. Will, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
The handicapping of what the High Court is going to do on this matter when?
Obviously we have to see what the case is and what the complaint is and where it's filed and how quickly the lower courts move. But I think that I read what the Supreme Court, rather what the Trump administration did. I read the executive order. I think Trump's on very solid ground here, both because of the Supreme Court precedent from the first term, but also just because he's very clearly exercising his authority in a very justified way. He's looking at what countries are we incapable of doing proper vetting for, and because they just don't have their anarchy or whatever is meaning that there's no real record system to be able to check up on people, so we can't properly vet any immigrants either for visas or for permanent residence. And so if you can't vet, then you just can't let those people in. That's what he's doing.
And in addition to that, too, in very Trumpian fashion, he also left it open. Look, if you can figure out a way to constructively engage with us such that we have a background on people that are, say, seeking asylum in this country, well, then I can change my mind. Then I can take you off the list. But there are things that you have to be able to do so that we can do what we need to do. And that's eminently fair.
Yeah, it's perfectly reasonable. It's actually kind of crazy that this wasn't already the policy.
Yeah, right.
Right. Like, why are we letting people in from countries where it's not even that they're unvetted, it's that it's impossible to do vetting. So we just cannot possibly know what their backgrounds are or their criminal records are.
And do you think the attack in Boulder, though, motivated him to act on this?
I think, honestly, no. I think they've been working on this. It's pretty clear that this is the result of an executive order that was issued on the first days of the administration, and then this is the result of the Secretary of State putting together the report of the countries that need to be banned. I think maybe there's a slight amount of additional urgency wanting to show that he's responding to this, but this would have happened soon in any event, I think.
Of course, it's not just on matters that relate to border security. Federal judges enjoining Trump from reducing the Department of Education staff by 1,300 people. Federal judge intervening to say you can't stop providing a trans care to federal inmates. I guess is there any of the injunctions that have been issued, particularly of late, on spending, on policies like that relate to federal inmates? Are the courts on solid ground here? Is this a Trump problem? Is this a Congress problem, failure to act, or is it federal judges consistently overstepping their bounds?
It's the federal judges overstepping. It's really that simple. There is a constitutional crisis. It's being created by Article 3 encroaching on Article 2. There's just no way around that. You can look at lower courts. I mean, the Alien Enemies Act sort of crystallizes this. You had a lower court decision one of them saying that they had the right to determine whether or not there was an invasion or predatory incursion. I'm sorry, federal judges don't have intelligence agencies. This is not their job. It's not their area of expertise. In every other similar circumstance in the past, where intelligence matters come up, federal judges defer to the findings of the executive branch because there's a capacity problem. And then what the Supreme Court did in the Alien Enemies Act case, where they issued an injunction against the government as a whole before there had even been a lower court opinion, they violated their own rules on procedure. They're not supposed to do that until there's a lower court opinion to review because they're a court of appellate jurisdiction, not original jurisdiction, except in rare instances. So the courts have really not colored themselves in glory, and that includes the Supreme Court. With that said, I think, on most of these issues, the administration will end up prevailing. We still do have 6 Republican-appointed justices on the court. It's not a liberal court, but it's become a little bit too clear that they're willing to drop anything at the drop of a hat to deal with the problems of illegal alien gangbangers, and I think they need to get their priorities in order.
I wanted to ask you about the BBB, Big Beautiful Bill. You said there's one provision, a main provision, that addresses AI, and what's that?
Oh, there's an AI provision that I think it basically will create a federal moratorium on regulation. I don't know. There's good arguments on both in both ways on that one. It's an interesting debate, but.
Something else, Trump that is doing proactively. This investigation he directed Pam Bondi to conduct as to whether Biden aides conspired to deceive Americans about his mental capacity and in whether or not he illegally wielded presidential powers, think auto pen. Among other areas, reportedly, the investigation will examine activities to shield public from Biden's mental and physical health information, agreements between aides to fake videos showing Biden cognitively capable, false public statements, and a second probe will investigate Biden's auto pen use for executive actions, including but not limited to clemency grants and EOs. Is this a appropriate use of executive power for Trump to direct Bondi accordingly?
Of course. I mean, there's a real question about whether or not the president was actually exercising his executive authority. Now, I wouldn't be too optimistic about the results here because proving this will be incredibly difficult. Right. You will basically need whistleblowers from the internal Biden administration, and it's hard to see which whistleblowers would come forward because they would all be basically admitting their own complicity in very serious crimes. So I think I would assume that none of them are going to admit that there was anything other than full presidential authorization for every presidential action. So, but that said, it's worth investigating because I think we all know the actual truth, which is that Joe Biden wasn't in charge of good chunks of what his administration was doing and what was being signed in his name.
Yeah, God, in retrospect, he should have preemptively pardoned his entire, sort of inner circle. If he would have known then what he knows now, or somebody around him knows at least. The auto pen thing specifically, what's your view on this? Because I know when this first arose, there was a look back, and at least one such piece I read indicated that George W. Bush had looked at the use of auto pen and sought legal opinion as to whether or not it would potentially be problematic if he used an auto pen on executive orders or clemency actions, even though obviously George W. was of his, right mind and so forth. That wasn't in question, but just that it could be challenged. It wasn't the authentic signature. The report is that his attorneys essentially said the auto pen stands so long as the user of it is competent, so it wouldn't have been a problem. But he decided just to sign everything himself anyway to be on the safe side. Is there any sort of is that the settled legal opinion on the auto pen, or is this an open question?
That's my understanding that's the settled understanding. I mean, and the alternative would be pretty nightmarish, where we'd have. I mean, if you said the alternative, then we'd be going back and looking at. I mean,
yes, right.
Obama executive orders, Trump executive orders, if the audio pen was ever used. And there's a lot of executive orders and signatures that go out the door. So I think the right question is, did the executive actually authorize it? Did the president actually direct the auto pen to be used on any particular order? Did he know what was going out in his name? If he did, then, I mean, that seems like the simple answer is to let those things go, because the alternative is to really undo a whole bunch of executive action that the president's in fact intended.
This is a little bit inside baseball, but your Article 3 project founder, Mike Davis, has been public about this, including on Bannon's podcast recently. And it is somewhat important because of the sway and the resources here. I'm talking about former head of the Federalist Society, Leonard Leo, who was instrumental in putting together the judge list in Trump's first term, including for Supreme Court nominees. And the reported break from the campaign in 2024 to present between Leo, who got like $1.5 billion from Barry Side, who's a Chicago guy. I know, at least a lot of people know. But anyway, essentially turned over a significant portion of his fortune. He was very much a public advocate, very much a free market libertarian kind of guy. He put Leo in charge of using his resources to those sorts of ends going forward in perpetuity. And then there's been this break, and it's one of those things where you want people that are similarly inclined and have the ability to have significant impact to be aligned, because these are important policy fights, and personnel is a part of it. And Mike Davis has been pretty pointed on Leo, and from what I understand from people I know, I think what Mike Davis is saying is fairly accurate. But just some perspective on it, if you want to offer it, because as I said, it's a little inside baseball, but it's also relevant.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's Leo was very heavy and involved in the first term in getting a lot of the Trump judges confirmed, and I don't think Trump has been impressed with the results in terms of given how many Trump judges are on the courts, how many of them are kind of seemingly undermining his policies, how many of them are seemingly tied to, reading the New York Times and the Washington Post opinion pages and maintaining the good affection of, their fellow lawyers rather than doing, having courage. I mean, because you think about it this way, the legal profession can be very cowardly, especially even the conservative legal movement. I mean, President Trump was flailing in the wind. The January 6th protesters were flailing in the wind. All the big law firms were happy to throw 7 lawyers at this Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, for example, or any number of Al Qaeda cases, to protect the rule of law. But the moment it was just American January 6th protesters getting charged with unbelievably aggressively by the DC U.S. attorney's offices, these white shoe conservative lawyers were nowhere to be seen. There wasn't any pro bono help for them, except I had a friend, Bill Shipley, who was flying in from Hawaii into D.C. to represent these people because they weren't getting any representation from the D.C. bar. So, I like the fact that Trump is looking in a different direction. He's not looking to Leo. He's looking for, judges who are courageous, who've demonstrated the courage of their convictions and the willingness to go against the herd. And I think, Emil Bove is, I think, the best example of that. I think he's, he represented Trump when nobody else wanted to. And, he's a serious lawyer with 10 years in the SDNY as a prosecutor, clerkships galore. But, he was willing to take on the Trump administration Trump representation when other lawyers weren't. And, he's been very bold and as the acting number two in the DOJ. So I think, if he was the very first appellate appointment, if he's kind of indicative of what we're going to see going forward, I think we're going to have a lot of good judicial appointments this term.
Will Chamberlain, Senior Counsel at the Article 3 Project. Will, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
You deserve a dedicated financial resource. Meet Michelle Ashute with West Point Financial Group, a Mass Mutual firm. Michelle builds lifelong relationships, guiding